I've received letters that were passive-aggressive. I've received letters that were just plain aggressive. This was the first letter I'd ever received that accused my fence of being hostile. I was standing in my driveway, right next to the mailbox, holding the perfectly, offensively beige envelope. The paper was cardstock, thick enough to stop a low-caliber bullet. The return address was just Cypress Creek HOA Architectural Review Committee. Buddy, my 80-pound golden retriever, and the entire reason for the fence in the first place, nudged my hand, his tail thwacking against my leg. "No, it's not a treat, Bud," I muttered, tearing it open. "It's from Brenda." Buddy let out a low, unhappy woof. Even he knew. I unfolded the letter. Laser-printed. Times New Roman. Judgmental. Dear Mr. Frank Henderson, this letter serves as an official notice regarding the unapproved structure erected at your property, Lot 38, on or about the 14th of this month. The Architectural Review Committee, HOA, has conducted a visual inspection and found the new fencing to be in violation of the Cypress Creek Community Bylaws, Article 4, Section 2B. I skimmed past the boilerplate. My eyes landed on the gold. Furthermore, the committee finds that the structure's aggressive verticality and non-harmonious aesthetic create a hostile and unwelcoming barrier to community light and cohesion. The dark, brooding stain is a stark departure from the approved natural cedar or community taupe palette. It looms. "Hostile," I said aloud, stunned. I looked over at the fence. It was a beautiful, brand-new 6-foot cedar privacy fence. It smelled like a forest. I'd paid a small fortune for it. "Buddy, does that look hostile to you?" Buddy barked. He was probably just excited about the word hostile, but I took it as agreement. "Did it glare at her?" I asked the dog, crumpling the letter in my fist. "Did it make a rude gesture at her prize-winning azaleas? What does a hostile fence even do? Does it have, like, spikes? Is it going to invade her yard?" The fence was the definition of fence. It was vertical planks of wood. Its aggressive verticality was what, in common parlance, is known as being a fence. And non-harmonious? The entire point of a privacy fence is to be non-harmonious, with the guy watching you grill from his kitchen window. The dark, brooding stain was a high-quality weather sealant called mountain redwood. I thought it was classy. Brenda, apparently, thought I'd built a Gothic fortress to summon demons. I thought back to just 2 weeks ago, when the post-hole digger was still in my yard. My neighbor on the other side, Tom, had wandered over. Tom's a good guy. He's into craft beer and fixing lawnmowers. "Hey, Frank," he'd said, squinting at the cement bags. "Putting in the fence, huh?" "Yeah, man," I'd replied, wiping sweat off my face. "Hope you're cool with it. 6-foot cedar. Buddy's got this new habit of trying to liberate the Amazon delivery driver, and I'm tired of fishing him out of the ornamental pond 3 blocks over." "Are you kidding?" Tom laughed. "Sounds great. Keep your dog in. Keep the rabbits out of my tomatoes. It's a win-win. That mountain redwood stain?" "Yeah, you like it?" "Classy," he'd said, nodding. "Classy. See? Reasonable. Tom is reasonable. The fence is reasonable. The only hostile and non-harmonious thing in this neighborhood was the woman who had just written this letter. And, as if summoned by the sheer power of my incandescent rage, there she was. Brenda. She was power-walking. You couldn't just call it walking. It was an athletic event, a performance of sheer, joyless momentum. She was in a matching teal tracksuit, a white visor clamped so tight on her head it looked structural, and shoes so bright they violated local noise ordinances. She was across the street, but she slowed her pace as she passed my house. It was the slowest power walk in human history. Her head remained locked forward, but I could feel her eyes radiating disapproval from the side of her skull. She didn't look at me. She looked at the fence. Then, just as she was about to pass, she executed a perfect 90-degree head snap. She looked right at me, still holding her letter. She didn't wave. She just smiled. It was a thin, tight, bloodless smile. It was a smile that said, "I have your $8,000 fence in a bureaucratic chokehold, and I am enjoying this." It was the most hostile thing I'd ever seen. I stood there, letter in hand, dog at my feet. The fence loomed. Brenda smiled. The battle lines weren't just drawn. They were laser-etched in beige cardstock. I let myself simmer for 24 hours. I reread the letter. I drank a frankly irresponsible amount of bourbon. I explained the situation in detail to Buddy, who responded by trying to eat the letter, which I felt was a valid legal strategy. But by the next afternoon, I knew I had to face the beast. My plan was simple: the accidental run-in. I couldn't go to her house. That was ceding the high ground. But the community mailboxes? That was neutral territory. A suburban Switzerland. I saw her teal-clad figure marching down the sidewalk at 3:52 p.m. She was predictable, if nothing else. I grabbed my non-existent mail and hustled down the driveway, affecting a casual, "Oh, fancy seeing you here" stroll. I got there just as she was pulling her, no doubt beige, envelopes from box 37. She had a small bottle of hand sanitizer clipped to her tracksuit and was meticulously wiping down the metal handle of her mailbox door. "Hey, Brenda," I said, trying to sound breezy. She froze. She finished her sanitizing ritual, every circular wipe a tiny, aggressive act. She snapped the cap shut and finally turned to me. "Frank." It wasn't a greeting. It was an identification, a police lineup. "So, I started, fumbling. "Got your letter." "I assumed you had," she said. Her voice was as crisp and dry as a dead leaf. The 30-day rectification period began upon receipt. "Yeah, about that. I'm a little confused. The letter says my fence is hostile?" Brenda sighed, a short, impatient puff of air. "Frank, the committee, which I chair as you know, finds the structure confrontational." I blinked. Confrontational? It's a fence. It's literally just planks of wood standing next to each other. How can wood be confrontational? It hasn't said a word to me. Did it say something to you? She did not appreciate my humor. Her lips got thinner. "It's the intent, Frank. The feeling. It looms." "It's a 6-foot fence. It's supposed to loom. A little. That's the privacy part of privacy fence. It blocks the afternoon sun from Mrs. Petrov's zinnias," she said, as if this was a checkmate. Mrs. Petrov lived 2 doors down. The shadow from my fence couldn't reach her yard unless the sun suddenly teleported to the north. "Brenda, that's physically impossible, unless my fence is 1,000 feet tall." "The bylaws, Frank, section 4.1b, she recited, as if from a sacred text, "clearly state all structures must blend with the natural and community aesthetic. Yours juts." "It juts?" I was losing my mind. "It's a straight line. How can a straight line jut? What doesn't jut?" "A 4-foot picket fence," she said, with that killer smile again, "in community taupe. That would be harmonious. That would not jut." I felt my eye start to twitch. Brenda, I have an 80-pound retriever. A 4-foot picket fence is an appetizer. It's a suggestion. He would treat it as a low-impact hurdle. I need a privacy fence to keep him in the yard. This is when she went for the jugular. She looked past me, toward my house, where Buddy was at that very moment, sitting patiently on the porch. Her eyes narrowed. Perhaps, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a less confrontational dog would be more in line with community standards. I actually recoiled. Did you just call my dog confrontational? I'm simply stating that the bylaws are the bylaws, Frank. Your structure is hostile, it looms, and it juts. You have 29 days. She turned, her neon pink shoes squeaking on the pavement, and power walked away, leaving me in a cloud of sanitizer fumes and pure, unadulterated rage. She had called my dog confrontational. This was no longer about a fence. This was no longer about bylaws. This was war. A war of harmonious aesthetics. I stood there for a long time, watching her teal-clad backside retreat. I realized I couldn't fight the ruling. It was too subjective. Hostile could mean anything. Juts was undefinable. She'd built her argument out of pure, weaponized vagueness. I couldn't fight her. I couldn't go through her. But as I looked back at my beautiful, brooding, mountain redwood fence, an idea began to sprout. It was a tiny, petty, and frankly beautiful idea. If I couldn't tear down the hostile fence, I would just have to hide it. I spent that evening in my war room, which is what I call my back porch, with 3 essential items: a bottle of Bullet bourbon, the 300-page Cypress Creek HOA bylaw document, and Buddy, who served as a furry, non-judgmental legal consultant. The bourbon went down smooth. The bylaws did not. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic torment. There were rules for everything. The precise allowable color spectrum for seasonal holiday displays. No aggressive reds. The maximum diameter of decorative non-structural boulders, 18 inches. There was a full page on mailbox post girth. I was drowning in a sea of heretofores and aforementioneds. This is insane, Buddy, I mumbled, rubbing my temples. Section 8.2 says I can't have a garden gnome. A gnome. It's a non-approved artificial sentinel. What does she think the gnomes are doing? Reporting back to her? Buddy rested his chin on my knee and sighed, which I took to mean, keep reading, counselor. I refilled my glass and flipped to the landscaping section. And there it was. My shining beacon. My loophole. Section 9.4, Natural Plantings and Garden Beds. I read it once. I read it twice. I read it aloud to Buddy. The bylaws were obsessed with permanent structures. Fences, sheds, gazebos, decks. Anything made of wood, vinyl, or stone was regulated down to the millimeter. But natural flora? Seasonal plantings? It was a legal ghost town. The section was incredibly, beautifully vague. It said plantings should not impede public walkways and should be maintained in a healthy condition. That was it. No height restrictions. No aesthetic blending clause. No approved color palette. Nothing. It was as if Brenda, in her quest to regulate every inanimate object in the neighborhood, had completely forgotten about the entire plant kingdom. An idea hit me. It was so simple, so petty, so green. It was a work of malicious compliance art. I grinned, a slow, wide, bourbon-fueled grin. "Oh, buddy," I said, "we're gonna harmonize the hell out of this yard." The next morning, hungover but vibrating with purpose, I made a call. "Sal's Landscaping," a gravelly voice answered. "Sal? Frank Henderson, over on Cypress Creek. You did my neighbor Tom's retaining wall last year." "Yeah, Frank, I remember. Tom's yard. Thing's a swamp. What can I do for you?" "I have a unique job, Sal. A special project. When can you come by?" Sal was at my house in an hour. He was my spiritual opposite. Short, built like a fire hydrant, and chewing on a toothpick that looked like it had been with him for years. He wore a faded Soil King t-shirt and steel-toed boots caked in the earth of 1,000 yards. He got out of his massive rust-colored pickup, looked at my brand-new fence, and grunted. "Nice fence. Good stain. Mountain redwood?" "Thanks," I said. "Now, here's the job. I need a raised garden bed. I need it to be exactly 60 feet long and 3 feet high." Sal stopped chewing. He looked at the 60-foot fence. He looked at the 60-foot strip of grass in front of it. "You want a 3-foot-high, 60-foot-long bed, right, in front of the new fence." "Right in front of it, like 6 inches away. And I want it built out of those heavy-duty 4x4 treated timbers. I want it indestructible." Sal's eyes narrowed. He looked at the fence again. He looked at my face. Then his gaze drifted across the street to Brenda's house. She was, of course, pretending to trim her perfectly uniform boxwoods, her visor aimed right at us. A slow, beautiful, gap-toothed grin spread across Sal's face. He took the toothpick out of his mouth. "HOA?" he asked. "She said my fence was hostile." Sal let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like a shovel hitting gravel. "Hostile, hail. That's a new one. Last week I had one tell a lady her birdbath was promiscuous." He slapped the side of my fence. "Say no more, Frank. I know exactly what you need. We're gonna build you the Fort Knox of garden beds. Thing's gonna be able to stop a truck." He looked back at Brenda, who was now just openly staring. "And the soil," I said, feeling the glorious, petty energy flowing through me. "I don't want that bagged stuff from the hardware store. I want the good stuff. I want soil that's basically steroids for plants. I want aggressive soil." Sal's grin widened. "Oh, I got a custom mix. Mushroom compost, aged manure, bit of peat. It'll grow a jungle." He winked. "Gonna have to charge you the aggressive verticality fee, though. This one's personal." Sal and his team were not landscapers. They were artisans of war. They descended on my yard the following Monday with a sound that I, in my head, called the Symphony of Spite. There were circular saws, impact drivers, and the glorious thud of heavy timbers being dropped. Brenda was apoplectic. She didn't even pretend to power walk. She just stood on her porch, clipboard in hand, watching. They didn't just build a garden bed. They built a fortification. It was a 60-foot-long, 3-foot-high, over-engineered marvel of treated pine. It was, as Sal had promised, the Fort Knox of planters. It was so solid, you could have parked a car on it. It was, in its own way, far more hostile than the fence had ever been. The moment Sal's truck pulled away, after being paid a handsome bonus, Brenda's reign of terror resumed. She marched across the street, her shoes squeaking with rage. "Frank!" she barked. I was out back, holding a trowel, whistling. "Brenda? What a pleasant surprise." "What is this?" she sputtered, gesturing at the massive wooden structure. This is not on the approved list. This is a new structure. I gave her my most beatific, harmless smile. This? It's a garden, Brenda. You know, for seasonal plantings. Section 9.4. I checked. She looked at the bylaws, then back at the bed. She was visibly calculating. It's 3 feet tall. That's a wall. It's a raised bed, Brenda, I corrected her gently. My back isn't what it used to be. All that bending. Besides, I said, going in for the kill, I was just so worried about the non-harmonious look of the fence you mentioned. I figured a nice, soft, green garden in front of it would, you know, blend the aggressive verticality. Just trying to be a good neighbor. Soften those hostile lines. Her face went through an amazing series of colors. She was trapped by her own logic. The bed itself was a structure, but it was a landscaping structure designed to hold natural flora. She had no bylaw for it. She was in a bureaucratic checkmate. The committee will be monitoring this installation, she finally hissed, before turning on her heel and storming off. Phase 2 began that Saturday. I'd bribed my friend Dave with the promise of a case of good IPA and a steak dinner. Dave, having met Brenda at a neighborhood barbecue once, was instantly on board. "We're doing this," he said, a look of grim determination on his face. We spent 2 hours wheelbarrowing in Sal's steroid soil. It was black, rich, and smelled like a prehistoric forest. It was beautiful. "Dude, what is this stuff?" Dave asked, panting. "It feels powerful." "That, my friend, is the soil of vengeance," I said. Then came the planting. Brenda was, of course, watching from her window. I'm sure she was expecting petunias, maybe some nice, harmonious marigolds. I tore open the first seed packet. "What did we get?" Dave asked, cracking a beer. I held up the packet, reading the label aloud with dramatic flair. "We, my friend, have mammoth gray stripe sunflowers." Dave whistled. "Dude, mammoth? Oh yeah, I read the back to Buddy last night. Grows 10 to 12 feet tall under ideal conditions. Heads can be 14 inches wide." Dave looked at the 60-foot-long, 3-foot-deep bed of super soil. "These are ideal conditions, aren't they?" "These," I said, tearing open another packet, "are perfect conditions." We spent the next 3 hours planting. Not just a few seeds, not a charming border. We planted hundreds of them. We planted them in dense, staggered rows, 6 inches apart. We planted them like we were planting a furry green army. We finished, covered in dirt and that rich, earthy smell, and cracked 2 more beers. "It's done," I said, admiring our work. "It's a lot of sunflowers, Frank," Dave said. "There's no kill like overkill, Dave." The final step was the most beautiful. I spent Sunday afternoon installing a complex, industrial-looking drip irrigation system. I had tubes, spigots, and timers. It looked less like something for a garden and more like a life support system. I set the timer to water them twice a day. I was treating this not like gardening. It was a military operation, and I was giving my new recruits the best boot camp money could buy. It was a hot, wet, perfect Florida summer. Sal's steroid soil was no joke. It was jet fuel for the plant kingdom. The first sign of life came in 3 days. Hundreds of tiny green helmets pushed through the black soil in perfect, orderly rows. It was intimidating. Within a week, they were 6 inches tall. Within 2 weeks, they were 2 feet tall. With leaves the size of my hand, by the end of the 3rd week, my garden bed was gone. In its place was a 3-foot-tall, dense-as-hell wall of vibrant green. It was a hedge, a living hedge. My hostile fence was now completely, 100% obscured behind a leafy, living curtain. You couldn't see a single plank of mountain redwood. All you could see was a 60-foot-long, 3-foot-tall solid block of foliage. It was, in its own right, more of a barrier to community light than my fence had ever dreamed of being. And it was just getting started. The first email arrived on a Tuesday. I knew it was from her. The subject line was simply, "Your shrubbery. Frank, it has come to the attention of the Architectural Review Committee that the seasonal planting in your front-facing garden bed is exhibiting an unprecedented growth rate. The committee is concerned about the visual density and scale of this planting. While we appreciate your efforts to soften the fence line, this hedge is not in keeping with the open, airy aesthetic of Cypress Creek. Please inform the committee of your maintenance plan for this shrubbery. Regards, Brenda Chair, ARC." I read it, took a sip of my coffee, and crafted my reply. I was polite. I was helpful. I was a God-fearing, law-abiding homeowner with a surprising talent. "Dearest Brenda, isn't it wild? I'm just as surprised as you are. Must be all this rain and that good soil I bought. I'm just a guy with a green thumb, I guess. They're sunflowers, by the way, not shrubbery. So lovely. I'm afraid I can't trim them for airiness just yet, as that would ruin the blooms. I'm just so excited to see the flowers, so happy to be harmonizing the community. Best, Frank." I hit send and imagined her reading it, her visor steaming. The sunflowers, as if sensing my support, responded with even more vigor. They shot up. 4 feet, then 5. The stalks were getting thick like bamboo. I was out there every morning, coffee in hand, inspecting my troops. I'd pull a tiny weed, I'd check the irrigation, nozzles. I'd pat a giant, fuzzy leaf. "Grow," I'd whisper to them, as Buddy sniffed the base of the stalks. "Grow, you magnificent bastards. Grow and blot out the sun. Show her what aggressive verticality really looks like." They were at 5 feet, then 6. They were now officially as tall as the fence they were hiding. But they weren't just hiding it. They were replacing it. What was once a simple wooden barrier was now a 60-foot-long, 6-foot-high living monster. My yard was becoming a canyon of green. The light on my front porch was different, dappled, soft, jungle-like. It was actually kind of nice. Brenda, on the other hand, had stopped her power walks, or at least she'd rerouted. She no longer came down my side of the street. I'd see her teal form across the way, pointedly looking away from my house, her pace faster, angrier. I'd wave. I was becoming a monster, and I was loving every minute of it. By week 7, the hedge had become the wall. The sunflowers were now, and I am not exaggerating, 8 feet tall. Some of the more ambitious ones were pushing 9. The stalks were as thick as my wrist, the leaves as big as dinner plates. It was a solid, living, leafy barricade. My front yard was no longer a yard. It was an impenetrable fortress of foliage. I was sitting on my, now very private, front porch, enjoying a cold beer after work. Buddy was snoozing at my feet. The world was quiet, green, and peaceful, and then I saw it. Flashing red and blue lights. At first, They were just abstract strobes filtering through the giant leaves, making my porch look like a weird botanical disco. But then I heard the crackle of a radio. A car door thunked shut. I stood up, my heart suddenly hammering. Did she really? I walked to the edge of my porch. I couldn't see the street. I couldn't see anything but a wall of green. I had to walk down my front path, which was now more of a leafy tunnel, to see what was going on. A police cruiser was parked at my curb. A young, tired-looking officer was standing on the sidewalk, hands on his hips, just staring at the wall of plants. He saw me. "Sir?" he called out. "Evening, officer," I said, trying to sound casual. He had to physically part two giant, overlapping leaves to get to my front walk. It was like a scene from Indiana Jones. "Sir, are you the owner of these plants?" he asked. He looked up and up at the green canopy. "That'd be me, officer," I said, leaning against a stalk. "Everything okay? Are my flowers speeding? Loitering?" He sighed, a deep, profound, "I'm too young for this crap" sigh. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Sir, we got a call from a concerned citizen." "Brenda," I muttered. "From a concerned citizen," he repeated, "about an obstructed view. And, He pulled out his notepad and squinted at it in the twilight. "And a structurally intimidating plant formation." I couldn't help it. I barked out a laugh. "Structurally intimidating? Officer, they're flowers. They're 90% water. They're basically cucumbers with self-esteem." "Yeah, well," the cop said, clearly trying not to smile. "The caller, the citizen, was concerned they might fall over, and, that they were planted with aggressive intent." "Aggressive intent?" I said, throwing my hands up. "That's it. That's the one. Officer, I'm a gardener, not a supervillain. They're sunflowers. They follow the sun. That's the whole gig. They're not going to fall. Look at these stalks. They're like trees." The officer sighed again. He walked to the edge of my property, me following him. He peered around the corner of the great green wall. "Well, they're not blocking the sightline for the driveway," he said, mostly to himself. "And they're not in the public right-of-way." He turned back to me. He was a reasonable man, trapped in an unreasonable world of petty suburban warfare. "Look, sir," he said, lowering his voice, "you're not breaking any laws. I can't write a ticket for gardening too hard. But, the citizen is very concerned." "I'll bet," I said. He gave the leafy wall one last look. "Honestly, I'm kind of impressed. My wife can't even keep Basil alive." He started to walk back to his car, parting the green sea again. He stopped and turned. "Sir, just maybe keep 'em watered so they don't get, He searched for the word. "Hostile?" He didn't wait for a reply. He got in his car, and I watched the red and blue lights disappear down the street. I walked back to my porch, my beer forgotten. She had called the cops on my flowers. I looked at the wall, at the first little buds of yellow I could see forming at the top. "Okay, guys," I whispered. Phase 3. Calling the police on my sunflowers was, apparently, Brenda's last resort before pulling the nuclear option. 2 days later, another beige envelope appeared. It wasn't a fine. It was worse. I was being summoned. That was the word she used. Summoned. Like I was a disobedient peasant and she was the queen. "You are hereby summoned to an emergency meeting of the Cypress Creek Homeowners Association to discuss the unapproved large-scale agricultural installation at Lot 38. Agricultural installation. She was good. I'll give her that. The meeting was on a Thursday night in the community clubhouse. The clubhouse was a monument to beige, a sterile, joyless room that smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and broken dreams. When I walked in, I was met with the glares of what I could only assume was Brenda's committee. It was her, two other women who looked permanently disappointed, and a man who looked like he'd been woken up from a 30-year nap. And then there were the other 10 or so neighbors who just looked confused. My friend Tom was there, thankfully, and he gave me a subtle, "What the hell is this?" shrug. I took a seat in the back. Buddy, of course, was not allowed. He was probably too confrontational for the clubhouse. Brenda stood at the front, next to a projector screen. Oh God, she had a PowerPoint. "Thank you for attending this emergency session," she began, her voice radiating fake solemnity. "We are here to discuss a grave and growing threat to our community's aesthetic and harmony." She clicked a button. The first slide popped up. It was a before picture. It was my house, with the hostile fence clearly visible. She had, I kid you not, circled the fence in a red, jagged danger graphic, like it was a shark in the water. "As you know," Brenda said, "the committee cited Mr. Henderson for this aggressive and non-harmonious structure." Then she clicked again. The after photo. It was a picture of my house taken that morning. You couldn't see the house. All you could see was the 9-foot-tall, 60-foot-long, solid wall of green. It looked like a battalion of leafy soldiers standing at attention. She'd used a different graphic for this one, a giant yellow biohazard symbol. In response to the citation, Brenda said, her voice dripping with venom, Mr. Henderson, in a clear act of subterfuge, erected this spite wall of weeds. "They're sunflowers," I called out from the back. "They're an annual flower, not a weed." Brenda glared at me. "This agricultural installation is a clear violation of the spirit of the bylaws. It blocks light. It blocks air. It is, for all intents and purposes, a living fence, and is therefore a structure subject to the same height and material restrictions." A murmur went through the room. She was good. Living fence. That was her new angle. I stood up. "Brenda, I've read the bylaws. I've read them a lot. Section 9.4, natural plantings. There is no height restriction. None." I looked. "It's a loophole," one of the disappointed women snapped. "It's the rules," I shot back. "And besides, they're annuals. They're going to be dead in 3 months. By your logic, Mrs. Petrov's 7-foot-tall tomato stakes are an unapproved structure. Are you going to fine her? Are you going to fine God for excessive growth?" This got a few chuckles. Brenda's face tightened. "This is not a laughing matter, Frank. This is about community standards. It's an eyesore." And that's when my man, Tom, stood up. "Frankly, Brenda," Tom said, his voice calm and reasonable, "I'm more offended by your beige rock garden. At least Frank's thing is interesting. It's green. It's better than the brooding fence you hated so much." "It's attracting bees!" Brenda shrieked, losing her composure. "Good," Tom said. "My tomatoes need 'em. Look, Brenda, you called the guy's fence hostile. He fixed it. He planted flowers. Now you're mad about the flowers. What do you want? Do you want him to just pave his yard? Would that be harmonious enough for you?" The meeting immediately devolved into chaos. The guy who'd been asleep woke up and started yelling about someone's dog, not Buddy, thank God, pooping on his lawn. One of the disappointed women started arguing with Tom about the promiscuous bird baths. Brenda was banging a gavel. A gavel? Where did she even get a gavel? Screaming, "Order, order! The living fence is the topic!" But no one was listening. It was a full-on suburban mutiny. I just sat back and watched the beautiful, glorious anarchy. Nothing was resolved. The meeting was adjourned. Brenda screamed it an hour later. I walked out into the cool night air, grinning. It was a stalemate, a beautiful, leafy, 9-foot-tall stalemate. The meeting was the tipping point. Brenda had shown her hand. She had no legal leg to stand on, and the neighborhood had revealed its fractured, ambivalent soul. They were less afraid of my spite wall than they were of Brenda's beige tyranny. And then, as if sensing their moment, the sunflowers made their move. It happened overnight. The week after the meeting, the great green wall, now a solid 10 feet tall, with some overachievers pushing 11, was dotted with buds. The next morning, I woke up, grabbed my coffee, and walked out onto my porch. And I stopped dead. It was glorious. The entire 60-foot-long, 10-foot-high wall had exploded. It was a solid, unbroken, deafening blast of yellow. Hundreds of massive, plate-sized, vibrant yellow flower heads had opened as one. But here was the master stroke. The part I hadn't even planned. The universe's perfect cosmic comedic gift. Sunflowers, as their name implies, follow the sun. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. My house faces east. Brenda's house, across the street, faces west, which meant every single one of those hundreds of giant yellow flowers was angled away from my house, away from my porch, and was staring, with a bright, cheerful, unblinking, 1,000-yard stare directly at Brenda's house. It was a silent, yellow, 10-foot-tall army. It was a firing squad of pure, unadulterated botanical joy, and it had its weapons aimed squarely at the enemy. I started laughing. A deep, uncontrollable, "I am a genius and also God is on my side" laugh. Buddy started barking, sensing the victorious mood. It was no longer a wall. It was a spectacle. The neighborhood reaction was immediate. What was once Frank's weird hedge became the great sunflower wall of Cypress Creek. People slowed their cars down to look. They didn't just slow. They stopped, causing minor traffic jams on our sleepy street. Teenagers were taking selfies with it. I caught a high school kid in his cap and gown taking his graduation photos in front of it. At an Instagram option, influencer I'd never heard of did a whole photo shoot. Then, the local paper's weird news blogger wrote a piece. I framed it. Local man's hostile fence replaced by glorious sunflower spite wall. HOA president. Not a fan. I was a local hero. I was the king of petty compliance. My porch was now the best room in the house. I was completely, totally, blissfully private. I couldn't see the street. I couldn't see the mailman. And most importantly, I couldn't see Brenda's house. I could only see the backs of the flowers, a lovely textured leafy green. She, on the other hand, could only see my victory. Every time she looked out her window, every time she opened her front door, she was confronted by a 60-foot-long, 10-foot-high panel of glee. A silent, yellow, "Up yours." Brenda's defeat was total. She was a ghost. Her power walks ceased entirely. Her blinds, which were normally open by 6 a.m. sharp, remained drawn until noon. She wasn't just beaten. She was shaded. I sat on my porch, sipping a beer, hidden from the world, listening to the gentle buzz of 1,000 happy bees. It was, I thought to myself, finally, harmonious. I should have known it was too good to last. Tyrants don't just give up. They regroup. They re-strategize. My victory lasted 3 beautiful, golden, sun-drenched weeks. The wall was at its absolute peak. The bees were having a non-stop party. I was the king of my leafy castle. Then came the new letter. It wasn't beige. This one was a stark, clinical white. The return address wasn't the Architectural Review Committee. It was from the HOA Health and Sanitation Committee. My blood went cold. I tore it open. Brenda's name was at the bottom, of course. She was the interim chair of this committee, too. How convenient. Dear Mr. Henderson, a formal complaint has been filed with the Health and Sanitation Committee regarding your property, Lot 38. Following an inspection from the public access sidewalk, the committee has identified several critical health code violations. The excessive foliage of your sunflower installation has created a dark, damp, and unventilated environment against your home's foundation, creating a high-risk haven for mold, mildew, and fungus. Furthermore, the extreme density of the planting is attracting. I braced myself. Rodents, rodents, not bees, rodents. The planting is providing cover and a half for rats, mice, and other vermin, which pose a direct health threat to the community. We have photographic evidence of squirrels, a known rodent, congregating near the installation. Squirrels. She was declaring war on squirrels, the most common, non-threatening animal in the entire state. I kept reading, my hands shaking. Due to the clear and present danger to community health and property values, the HOA is exercising its right under Article 99, Section 3, Community Nuisances, to abate the threat. Therefore, the HOA has hired a community-approved landscaping service to remediate the nuisance. They will arrive in 48 hours on Friday at 9:00 a.m. to trim the flora to a safe and sanitary height of 4 feet, and to thin the planting to allow for adequate airflow. If you interfere, you will be subject to fines. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. She wasn't fining me. She wasn't summoning me. She was coming to cut them down. She was going to murder my sunflower wall. This was no longer about aesthetics. This was a direct attack. This was a decapitation order. I stood there, staring at the letter. Rodents. Mold. Nuisance. She had found new words. She had found a new angle. And this one was sharp. I panicked. I stormed out the front door and plunged my head into the leafy jungle. I got on my hands and knees. It was fine. It was just soil. There was no mold. There were no rats. I saw an earthworm. I saw a beetle. I did not see a high-risk haven. I saw a garden. I stood up, breathing hard. 48 hours. I ran inside and grabbed my phone. I had one call to make. Sal's Landscaping. Sal, it's Frank! Frank Henderson! Frank, my man! How's the Fort Knox bed? How's the aggressive soil? It worked too well, Sal. It worked too well. They're 10 feet tall. They're beautiful. And she's trying to kill them. Whoa, slow down, Sal said, his gravelly voice instantly calming. What do you mean, kill them? I read him the letter. The health and sanitation, the rodents, the 48-hour notice, the community-approved landscaper. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Huh, Sal finally said. Rodents. That's a new one. Clever. Sal, what do I do? Can I get a restraining order? For my flowers? Sal laughed. Not quite. But she can't just do that. That's your property, man. She can't just hire some goon to come on your land and start cutting your assets. She is. Friday, 9 a.m. Another pause. I could hear Sal thinking, maybe chewing his toothpick. Friday, 9 a.m., huh? You know, I think I'll be in the neighborhood. Got a big mulching job over on Oak Street. I'll probably be driving by right around then. Be a shame if, I had to park my truck for a minute. A wave of relief washed over me. Sal, you are a saint. Nah, I just hate HOAs. And I really hate bullies. You just be out there on your porch, Frank. Be visible. This is your land. We hung up. I looked at the letter. 47 hours. Friday morning. 8:45 a.m. I was a nervous wreck. I was on my front porch, drinking coffee I couldn't taste. Buddy was at my feet, sensing the tension, letting out low, nervous whines. I'd given him his anxiety peanut butter. We were in this together. At 8:52 a.m., a white landscaping truck I didn't recognize rumbled down the street. It was not Sal's. It was a clean, sterile truck with a generic Community Landscape Solutions logo on the side. It parked across the street. At 8:55 a.m., Brenda's front door opened. She emerged, not in her tracksuit, but in what I guess was her execution outfit. It was a crisp linen pantsuit. Beige, of course. She held her clipboard like a scepter. She crossed her arms and stood on her porch, watching. At 8:58 a.m., a man got out of the truck. He looked bored. He was carrying a massive gas-powered heavy-duty hedge trimmer, the kind you use to clear brush, not trim flowers. At 8:59 a.m., just as the man started to walk across the street, I heard it. A low diesel rumble. Sal's massive, rust-colored, battle-scarred Ford F-350 dually turned the corner. It was a glorious sight. The trimmer guy, I'll call him Gary, stopped on the sidewalk. Sal didn't slow down. He drove right up and with a hiss of air brakes, parallel parked his truck perfectly between Gary and my driveway, blocking the entire property. He blocked the truck. He blocked the curb. He blocked everything. He left his engine idling. At 9 o'clock a.m., Sal hopped out of the cab, toothpick in place. He was wearing his Soil King shirt. "Mornin'," Sal grunted at Gary. Gary, trimmer in hand, looked confused. Excuse me, man, I got a work order. Lot 38. Lot 38? Sal said, feigning surprise. Frank's place? He gestured to me. I waved, my hand shaking. Yeah, HOA called. Nuisance abatement. Gotta trim these, Gary looked up at the 10-foot wall of yellow. Big-ass flowers. Sal walked over and slapped one of the giant stalks. These? Oh, you can't touch these. Nope. What? I got a work order. Yeah, see? Sal said, taking the toothpick out of his mouth and pointing it at Gary. This is produce. This isn't flora. This is a crop. Gary blinked. I blinked. Across the street, Brenda's jaw went slack. "This is a, custom irrigated, pre-sold harvest," Sal continued, improvising like a jazz master. "Yeah, that's it. It's a sunflower seed farm. My client, Mr. Henderson, is a farmer. These heads are pre-sold to me. Sal's Landscaping. We use them for, custom birdseed mix." He turned to Gary. "You cut this produce before harvest. That's not trimming. That's destruction of private agricultural property. That's tortious interference with a business contract. You're talking big-time lawsuit. You, your company, and—" He squinted at Brenda across the street. "The client who hired you. Big time." Gary, the trimmer, who was clearly not getting paid enough to be sued for tortious interference, looked at his hedge trimmer. He looked at Sal's 10,000-pound truck. He looked at Brenda, who was now purple. I gotta call my boss," Gary mumbled. He walked back to his truck and got on the phone. I couldn't hear the conversation, but it involved a lot of, "What? And he says it's produce. And I don't know, man, the other guy's huge." He hung up. He looked at Sal. He looked at me. "Right, screw this. My boss says we ain't touching produce without a court order." He threw the hedge trimmer in the back of his truck, got in, and, after Sal graciously moved his F-350, sped off down the street. Sal looked at me. I looked at Sal. Across the street, Brenda let out a sound I can only describe as a dying tea kettle and slammed her front door. Sal just winked at me, got back in his truck, and rumbled off to his mulching job. The wall was safe. The fall came. As all things do, the Great Wall began to die. It was part of the life cycle. The bright yellow heads drooped, heavy with seeds. The leaves turned brown. The stalks dried out. I spent a glorious Saturday in late October harvesting my produce. I was a farmer, after all. I got a ladder and a pair of shears and cut down every single massive head. It was a staggering harvest. I had 50 pounds of sunflower seeds. I got one final letter from the HOA. It was a neighborhood-wide memo. The board, Brenda, had passed an emergency bylaw. The Sunflower Act of Cypress Creek, I called it. Effective immediately, no non-woody annual or perennial plant, flower, or vegetable may exceed a maximum height of 8 feet. She had won, in the end. She'd gotten a rule. I sat on my porch, my hostile fence, now fully visible again, looking at the 8-foot-high, brown, dead stalks. I was bagging up the seeds. I sent 10 pounds to Sal, with a note. Payment for pre-sold produce. Thanks, brother. I filled every bird feeder in my yard. The squirrels were having a feast. It was beautiful. And then, with the last 5-pound bag, I took a walk. It was late. The moon was high. I walked across the street, over to Brenda's house. I looked at her perfect, sterile, harmonious beige rock garden. I tripped. The bag accidentally tore open. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands, of mammoth gray stripe sunflower seeds scattered across her pristine beige rocks. I brushed myself off, whistling, and walked back home. "See you next spring, Brenda," I whispered.